Let's say you're dating somebody you really, really like and they break up with you. Do you think, I'm a loser? Wow, did I screw that up? I will never find a life partner? All three of those statements. Or do you think, bummer, I thought we were really good together and I'm sad they don't feel that way? If you answered with one of the first four choices, you are probably sabotaging yourself with unhelpful thinking styles that can be changed. I'm Barbara Heffernan, and I'm a psychotherapist who's been helping people recover from anxiety and trauma for over 15 years. For videos designed to help you live a more joyful life, please subscribe to my channel and hit the bell to be notified when I release a new video every Tuesday. Unhelpful thinking styles can really make our lives miserable. They dramatically impact our mood and our behavior, and they can be very self-destructive when they run rampant. Let's figure out whether you're sabotaging your own happiness with unhelpful thinking styles and what you can do about it. Unhelpful thinking styles is a concept from CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. CBT therapy or CBT counseling is based on the idea that how we think and how we behave impact how we feel. We are all connected. CBT therapy helps us see how we are viewing the world, what lens we are viewing the world through. And then it helps us to adjust how we think, and that's called cognitive restructuring. And then it also helps us change certain behaviors. Now, cognitive restructuring is sort of a fancy word for a therapist's active efforts to help you reframe your thoughts. Reframe how you're seeing certain situations. And the first step, before we can reframe anything, before we can restructure thoughts, we need to identify them. So the first step is to identify what automatic thoughts you are having and what category of unhelpful thinking styles those thoughts fall into. So let's go back to the question I asked at the beginning of this video, how you would feel and respond if somebody broke up with you who you really liked. So if you answered, I'm a loser, that would fall into the category of labeling, and it would also fall into the category of emotional reasoning. So those are two categories of unhelpful thinking styles in the CBT world. Now, labeling is obvious. If you're saying, I'm a loser, you're labeling yourself as a loser. And that kind of labeling is actually doing to yourself what schoolyard bullies do to the people that they pick on. It is taking the entire essence of a person and narrowing them down to one negative label. And the label is really meaningless. So it's really important to think about how you label yourself, what words you use to refer to yourself. Common ones would be, I'm a loser, I'm bad, I'm stupid, I'm a failure. And a reframe for labeling is to think about what you would say to a good friend. If you had a good friend and someone broke up with them, you'd probably tell your friend, there is nothing wrong with you. That person missed a great opportunity. And if you can begin to speak to yourself as a friend, and I know this is not easy if you have a long history of negative labeling of yourself, but if you can at least bring that to mind and notice when you're doing it and think that there is an alternative, even if you can't actually execute on the alternative, it's very helpful to bring it to mind anyway. It begins you on that journey of talking to yourself in a nicer manner, beginning to treat yourself like a friend. Because after all, who's with you all the time? Who's the person you will go through your entire life with? It's you. You might as well be a friend to yourself. So the other CBT unhelpful thinking style in that statement, I'm a loser, is called emotional reasoning. I feel like a loser, so I am a loser. Sometimes we take our feelings and how we are feeling in a moment and we turn it into a pervasive label for ourselves. We can also apply emotional reasoning to other people. You might have somebody in your life who most of the time you love, but when you're really, really angry at them, you might feel like, I can't stand this person. I never want to see them again. And then you wake up the next morning, you're in a better mood, and you really love them again, and you like remember, wow, I really felt that way and I really thought it was true. So that's emotional reasoning. Now, I don't believe we should discount our emotions. Our emotions can be wonderful signals to live our life by, but when our emotions get extreme and we get extremely upset, it tends to distort our thinking. The other area where emotions tend to distort our thinking is if we have a go-to emotion. If we are just always anxious, then our emotions aren't as useful because they're all covered over with anxiety. If we're always depressed, then that go-to emotion has kind of taken over and we're no longer in access with all of the different varied levels of emotions that can really give us signals. So that's another situation where emotional reasoning does not work. So the next statement that I suggested someone might think if someone broke up with them is, I will never find a life partner. Now that statement is catastrophizing. It's a projection. It's a projection into the future. It's the worst possible outcome, say, for a person who wants to find a life partner. Not everybody does, I understand that. But if that is a negative projection as like the worst possible thing that could happen, that would be called catastrophizing. And people with anxiety and depression catastrophize a lot. And this is a CBT unhelpful thinking style that it's very good to begin to be aware of, because sometimes these thoughts are so automatic you don't even realize you're having them. You're just immediately projecting like, yeah, that's it. I've had 3 breakups in a row. I'm going to be alone the rest of my life. Nobody's ever going to want to be with me. And oh, why should they? Because I'm a loser. So these can all go together and they can make things much worse. And so if we go back to the question of what you would say to a friend, if you knew a friend was thinking like they had this breakup and they're never going to get married, or they're never going to find a life partner, they're never going to be with somebody they love, you would be pretty sure that that person was exaggerating and projecting and not thinking in a particularly helpful way. But weirdly, when we do it for ourselves, we truly believe it. And I guess that brings me back to the emotional reasoning. I feel it, so I believe it. And so we believe these things that are projections of our mind and our mood, and there's no truth to it. There's no evidence of it whatsoever. And your mind is a very tricky place, and your mind will be able to argue against this, but an outside person would be able to sort of see the picture more clearly and help you understand that, yeah, no, that's totally catastrophizing, not going to happen. And if you can begin to label some of your thoughts as catastrophizing, and then realize that that means that they're a projection, that means they are a creation of your mind looking into the future, and they are not facts. And if you can somewhat continually work with that, eventually that automatic thought pattern can be changed. The third statement that I suggested somebody might feel if someone broke up with them is, wow, I sure screwed that up. And that thought would fall into the category of personalization. Personalization is thinking it's all about me. So I've seen plenty of situations where person A breaks up with person B, and person B takes it personally and think they did something wrong. But person A actually has severe intimacy issues and was actually beginning to feel very close to person B, and that scared them and they ran away. So they actually broke up with person B because person B was a good person that they were feeling close to. So that happens. It also happens that person A maybe has too much going on in their life, family problems that they're embarrassed to share. I have seen that happen a lot. Or maybe they just never got over their last relationship and they're just not ready. But there are probably a whole host of reasons that they broke up with you that have nothing to do with you. And if it did have something to do with you, you may just not have been a fit. But it doesn't mean you screwed it up. The fourth option I gave as to what somebody might think if someone broke up with them was that they would think all 3 of those things. I'm a loser, I'll never find a life partner, and I sure screwed that up. And I do think many people would put all 3 of those things into that category. And if that happens initially and then you resolve that fairly quickly, I'd say that falls into the category of pretty normal thinking. But if those negative statements about yourself are very persistent, then that becomes self-sabotaging behavior. Because if those are the things you believe, you probably don't try dating again. You probably get fairly depressed or more anxious, or you might throw yourself into some unhealthy behaviors, but you'll either avoid making progress in the area you'd like to make progress in, or you actually move into more self-destructive, directly destructive behaviors. So the last option that I suggested as an alternative would be to say, I'm really sad. I'm bummed out. I thought that relationship had great promise. I was really enjoying them, and I am really upset and disappointed that they broke up with me. And that would be a valid statement of feeling. It would be naming how you're feeling now, knowing that feelings change, and it wouldn't be assigning blame or taking on blame. It would simply be, I'm bummed out. And you know what? We get disappointed in life sometimes. We just do. And if you're able to sit with and accept those feelings and let them kind of rise and then fall, you can then move on with your life in an adaptive manner. In order to illustrate 2 other CBT unhelpful thinking styles, I'd like to use an example from the workplace. But before I do that, I want to give a shout out to my mom who painted that painting. It's really awesome, isn't it? It's beautiful. It's one of my favorites. And as you can see, once in a while, I dress to match it. Let me know in the comments below if you have something in your office or your favorite room at home which is beautiful, you love it, and it's created by somebody you love. Let's say you're in your office and your boss walks in looking incredibly grumpy and just whizzes past your desk, doesn't say hello, doesn't even acknowledge you. Do you immediately jump to the conclusion that it's something you did? Do you immediately say, oh my God, it's because I know exactly what it is. I screwed that thing up yesterday and I'm sure they're really, really mad at me, and yada, 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 and maybe even go to the place where you're getting fired? Well, if you do all that, you are actually combining 3 different unhelpful thinking styles. One of them is mind reading, thinking that you can read the other person's mind. You observe a behavior, and without asking a question, without having any real evidence, you jump to some kind of conclusion and think you know what they're thinking. And this happens all the time. And this is a key component of collapses in communication, because if you are doing that, you're probably not following up with a lot of questions. You probably wouldn't go to your boss and just simply say, hey, is everything okay? Which actually might be a really helpful thing for your boss and for you. It would also be personalization, seeing somebody else's bad mood and immediately thinking that you caused it or that you had something to do with it, when maybe it has nothing to do with you whatsoever. So that would be the personalization, which we talked about already. And then spinning the story out to where you're losing a job is, can you guess? Catastrophizing, which is a projection. So all 3 of those things are wrapped up in that micro moment when you see somebody in a bad mood and you immediately think it's about yourself and you project out to some horrible outcome. And the last CBT unhelpful thinking style I'd like to talk about today is the mental filter of disqualifying the positive, maximizing negative situations, events, or qualities about yourself, and minimizing the positive. And those are sometimes broken into 3 different unhelpful thinking styles, but I see them all as the same thing. It's a mental filter of filtering out good information and only focusing on the bad, whether that's about the world or about yourself. And an example in the workplace that happens all the time would be receiving a review from a boss. And maybe it's really even a very positive review. Maybe your boss goes through, what a wonderful job you did on certain projects, how awesome you do working with customers, how wonderfully punctual you are, goes through all of these positive things, and then maybe makes some type of suggestion. And perhaps your boss intends it to really be a positive, constructive criticism that will help you to improve and eventually get promoted. And just to come up with an example, let's say the constructive criticism your boss gives you is that they'd like you to slow down on certain projects, do a little bit more proofreading, possibly do some research in a more thorough manner, and maybe be a little bit more timely on how you meet deadlines. So all of those would be meant to say, like, you're doing all these great things and here's some areas you can improve, and they're concrete and attainable and just something that you need to focus on. And you might walk away from that review completely devastated. You might filter out all the positive, gets pushed away and ignored, and the constructive criticism gets taken as a negative, goes into that pot of I'm a failure, which is the labeling we discussed, and anything positive gets dismissed and everything negative gets amplified. So that is another CBT unhelpful thinking style that can be very, very self-sabotaging. So what are the steps to stop self-sabotaging with these unhelpful thinking styles? First step is to identify your automatic thoughts. In order to identify your automatic thoughts, it's very helpful to begin to strengthen the observer part of your brain. And I talked about this last week when I released a video, which you can access here by the link above, called CBT Mindfulness. So identify your automatic thoughts. Number 2 is to categorize them. Put the thought into the category it belongs into. And let me just review those categories right here. 1, labeling. 2, emotional reasoning. 3, catastrophizing. 4, personalization. 5, mind reading. And 6, the mental filter, disqualifying anything positive and maximizing anything negative. And once you've categorized your thought, you can then begin to see it as a cognitive distortion. That's the other term we use in CBT therapy, is cognitive distortion. That's a label for something which is just simply not true. It's a distortion of your thoughts. And if you're able to identify some of your thinking as falling into these unhelpful thinking styles or cognitive distortions, you can know they're not true. You might still feel that they are, but at least you can begin to take a step knowing they're not true. And then you can begin to see, could I see this differently? What would I say to a friend? That's one of the best questions. What would I say to a friend who is in the same situation? And can I be a friend to myself? And if I can begin to speak to myself in a kinder, more compassionate, more reasonable way, actually, then my behaviors will also shift. So many self-sabotaging behaviors come from talking to yourself in a horrible way, catastrophizing, thinking things are horrible and you're a horrible person. Because if that's true, why bother trying anything? Why bother communicating with anyone? Why bother engaging your boss in terms of what the problem might be? Why bother trying to date again? Why bother moving forward in your life if you are going to believe these horrible feelings? Now, changing how you speak to yourself is not easy. It takes consistent practice and lots of tools. And I do have a free PDF called Transform Your Negative Core Beliefs. So if you find as you're going through this exercise that there are certain very repetitive themes and you feel like it's very difficult to dislodge that, you might find this PDF very helpful. The link is below. And I'd love to know what you think of this concept of being a friend to yourself. Please comment below, let me know. If you liked this video, please give me a thumbs up. It helps me know that I'm on track and motivates me to keep making more content for you. Till the next time.